You're welcome to the Friends at Work podcast with Ade Toye, the podcast about emotional intelligence at work. Hi, this is Ade Toye. This week, I wanted to explore the consequences of arming teachers and its potential impact on other teachers rather than just students. So I reached out to an experienced teacher I know here in the state of Maryland, Ryan Gilmore. We spoke over the phone, and it brings a fresh perspective to the national conversation about arming teachers. Before I play our conversation, I would like to apologize ahead for the poor sound quality in parts of the Fox News sound clip I played in the middle of our conversation. The clip is audible, but contains some sound artifacts that I was unable to remove during editing without drastically reducing the sound quality. Thanks for bearing with me. Here's our conversation.
My name is Ryan. I am a 13-year veteran teacher in the state of Maryland. I have taught second grade, third grade, as well as fourth grade at various elementary schools here in the state of Maryland. I am a father of two, a second grader and a first grader, and a very happy husband who is blessed to have as wonderful a wife as I do. And I'm just happy to be on the show with you.
Oh, great. You've been a teacher for many years. How do you handle school violence, generally, from bullying to other things? How has that happened? What has been your experience, both personal and within the schools that you've worked in?
So this is always a really uncomfortable part of working in the classroom. Different parents often have different philosophies about how the teacher should manage it. The different administrators that I've worked under have also had very different philosophies as to how to encourage positive choices and discourage negative choices. And so there's had to be some adjustments there as well.
Okay.
And so it's been managed in different ways depending on the administrator and the community voices that I've heard and that have been expressed to me. So I do want to kind of just mention that because as educators, we do have to be responsive to a lot of different voices within the community and within our school building and within the school district.
Okay.
A lot of the choices and a lot of the way that we need to manage them are actually kind of passed on to us through school policy.
Even if in those situations the policy may not be the best line of action to take, you still have to go ahead and do that. Is that what you're saying?
We need to make sure that we are meeting the expectations of our supervisors.
Okay. Okay. Wait. How much leeway does a teacher have to make a judgment call in a situation that they witness?
Personally, I feel like it depends on the administration.
Okay.
I've worked under two very different administrative styles. I've worked under three administrators. Two of them shared a very similar philosophy, and one was very different from theirs.
Okay. Can you share
but
both of them were? Yeah.
Yeah. One of the philosophies essentially expressed that if students hear repeatedly that they need to make sure that they are making good choices, if you only reward positive behavior in the classroom, that the negative choices will eventually be eliminated. And so we were required to continually provide just encouragement, which sounds great on paper.
Okay.
However, in practice, the problem that I saw within that is, and within developmental theories, the our moral development, our ability to identify good and evil, develops through our being provided with rewards for positive choices, but also with our facing consequences for negative choices.
Yeah. I mean, that's how life runs.
Right. I mean, if we make a bad choice, there's going to be a consequence for it. If you go onto a highway and you're speeding down the highway, you get pulled over, you have a ticket, you have a fine,
Yep.
etc., etc. And you might end up losing a day of work because you decide to go into court to kind of try to work some things out that way. So you have that consequence on top of everything else. The philosophy of only providing reward doesn't work because it eliminates the consequence side of development. Even 2-year-olds, often have to sit in the timeout because they said something mean, or they told mom no one too many times, or whatever the case might be. They may have hit another child for wanting to play with the toy that they were playing with at that time. So they learn hitting is wrong. It's the basic gist of it. And so the other philosophy is more aligned with that belief that it takes rewards and consequences to encourage children to learn appropriate moral standing.
Okay.
So that tends to be the philosophy that I agree with more, that I see has been more effective. And so if kids are doing really well, they get rewarded, so they want to continue to do really well.
Yes.
But even the best kid is going to make a mistake. They're going to get fed up with some kid who kept on picking on them or calling them names.
Yeah.
And so they're going to tell them to stop. And if they don't stop, they're probably going to call them a name back. And so both kids have to face consequence. They both made a mistake. Those consequences might be different because of frequency of the error or what have you. Name calling is probably one of those things that we deal with the most within the elementary setting,
Yeah.
where there's a lot of the negative comments about one kid versus another. On some extreme situations, that develops into physical fighting or just even like a push shove match.
Yeah.
And that's typically during those, like the recess times, or when they're walking in the hallway, or while they're at lunch. Some of those less structured times during the school day.
Yes.
Because typically in our classrooms, we're able to structure the classroom in a way and structure our lessons in a way that we can keep them engaged in a learning task to prevent some of those outbursts from happening. That doesn't always work out.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes there are behavioral concerns that occur in the classroom due to students that have certain disabilities where, for example, extreme cases of ADHD where there's extreme impulsiveness, they can result in some very abrupt negative choices
Yeah.
that then, for example, I've had kids in my class that have hit other kids or pushed other kids, and when they were asked about why they did it, the answer was, I don't know. And you follow up with that kid and you say, well, was that the right choice to make? No. Well, then why did you do that? And they'll just shrug their shoulders.
Yeah.
It wasn't something that makes sense to them afterwards, and they can't even identify a reason as to why that occurred. It was just an impulse in the moment, and they lost control of their body, they lost control of their thoughts, and there it goes. And so, I mean, we're constantly in this situation where we're thinking, how can we prevent there being any incidences of any type of violence or name calling or bullying in order to make certain that every child feels comfortable in our classroom.
Okay. So I want to move this forward a little more and come to something more current, which is the school shootings. And anybody who's been watching the news will find it pretty disturbing that students are being killed by either former students or current students in their schools. Before we go into the particular story, Parkland, Florida, that is the most recent nationally spread news that we know of. There are other, apparently, I wasn't even as aware. Apparently, this is happening a lot in many schools, and some of these stories do not get to national attention. But have you worked in any school, or does your school have an active shooter protocol? Is that a thing?
We have a district-wide, and I'm fairly certain that this is the case in most districts in Maryland. They might be called by different names, but I can speak on behalf of, with regard to my school district. Okay. We have what we call a lockdown drill or a lockdown routine, where if there is something that is happening, where even it might be a fear, there are 3 different levels of ensuring student safety. On the first level, the school no one can come in or out of the building.
Okay.
In order to enforce student safety, but the students can still move freely through the building. On more extreme cases, where it's the true full lockdown, we have to make sure that our doors are locked, that we check our hallway to make sure all students are in a classroom for their safety. We then make sure that our classroom doors are locked, that our lights are turned off, that any windows are fully covered, and that our students have been assembled into a safe area, whether it be that they have their head down quietly on their desk, that they've all kind of been huddled into a closet area or into a bathroom space, an area where we feel like they would be the most safe from whatever type of violent incidents may be occurring.
Okay. So are these drills run regularly, or is it something that all the teachers and administration is just aware of?
The lockdown drills are run on a fairly regular basis. I think that so far this year, I think we've had one a month. So wow. they've been as frequent as a fire drill would be.
I mean, that's good. That's good considering the different incidences that we've had. So I'm going to play you something. It's going to be a segue into me asking a question, but I'm going to play you a clip from Fox News. Just listen.
Trying to make sure teachers are better prepared after last week's deadly school shooting by educating them about guns.
Sheriff Richard Jones tweeting on Sunday, he said, quote, "I'm going to offer free concealed and carry class to teachers in Butler County. Limited number, details coming soon online, also training on school shootings."
Since then, the sheriff has received hundreds right now from Cincinnati. Sheriff, good morning to you.
Good morning. How you guys doing?
We're doing okay. We're talking about your offer, though. Why do you want teachers to carry guns in schools?
We had a school shooting here, and my daughter came to my house one morning at the day after the shooting. She was in tears, just like a lot of mothers in our country. She was taking her kids to school the next day, and every time there's a school shooting, she fears for her kids' safety. Being a grandpa, I determined that I'm going to do something. I'm not going to be like the other leaders in our country fighting over weapons and what's legal, what's not. We're going to actually do something. It's a community involvement. We're the 8th largest county in Ohio. We thought we'd offer 50 slots, and within 20 minutes we had 100. Within an hour we had 150. We'll probably be over 500. Wow. These are teachers, and when people say teachers don't want to be armed in school, that's not true. This is a community in Ohio. We're between Cincinnati and Dayton, and it's overwhelming with the numbers. We're going to do it for free. We're going to teach the teachers. We're going to give them a concealed carry permit when they're done. In Ohio, you can carry a concealed carry in the schools if the school board allows you to do that. We're going to do the training. We're starting the training next week. We're going to have 50 to a class, and we're leading by example. and we're getting calls from all over the country. How are we doing it? We've got vendors that are wanting to feed the people, free meals at lunchtime, the caterers. We've got people wanting to pay for their permits. People come forward. We've got to do something. There will be 2 weeks ago, the number was 15. Now the number is 17. And believe me, there's somebody out there now, as we're watching and talking, that want to beat that number. Mm-hmm. We've got to do something, and we've got to do it now. The copycats are coming. We cannot depend on our Congress and our Senate to do anything to fix this issue. Okay. All they're going to do is fight and argue.
Sheriff, if that's the school shooting down in Florida, there was a police officer that did have a gun, but obviously, it didn't help in this case. What is your plan? Do you want every teacher in the schools in your county to have guns, or do you want 10 or 12 in each school? What's the plan?
We had an officer in our school also armed, but when he left the cafeteria, the student got up and started shooting that gun and shooting people in the school. Mm-hmm. One is not enough. It needs to be teachers, and the kids don't need to know who has the weapon. Doesn't need to be all the teachers. We need to do something. We can't be like ostriches and have our heads in the sand. Okay. We've got to protect the kids, period.
All right. Sheriff Richard Jones joining us from Butler County, Ohio, where he's the sheriff there. Sir, thank you very much for joining us live. Good luck.
Thank you, Sheriff. Thanks for what you're doing.
What are your thoughts about arming teachers, particularly in Maryland?
No, thank you. I fully agree that our students need to be safe in the schools. I completely agree that our students deserve a right to a good education and a safe environment. However, I do not agree with arming teachers in the classroom.
And what are your reservations about that?
There's very frequently already confrontational. Sometimes there are confrontational relationships between two educators within a school building. Mm-hmm. There can be disagreements among teachers and parents. And honestly, I worry that in those situations where there are confrontations, whether it's among staff members, whether it's parent and teacher, whether it's student to teacher, I would be very concerned about the comfort level within those relationships. I know from my 13 years of experience that when a teacher and a teacher are, even if they don't agree with everything that each other say, mm-hmm. I know that through a positive rapport, even when a problem does come up, if there's been a past of a positive rapport, that there are a lot of problems that will be able to be worked through and eventually resolved, whether that, again, is between two teachers, a parent and a teacher, or student to teacher. If a teacher is carrying a gun, I'm very concerned that that rapport could very well shift. And instead of being a positive rapport, that some discomfort could be established, and that could impact what progress can be made moving forward.
Are you suggesting that the person with the gun may feel more powerful than their colleague who's not carrying and who's not necessarily permitted to carry in the school? Or how do you see that dynamic playing out?
Honestly, I mean, it's within the same type of argument, but I'm actually more concerned or worried in the other direction. Okay. That the individual who is not carrying could get to a point where they feel uncomfortable around the individual who is carrying, because in their mind, the power has shifted. Not necessarily that the individual who is carrying could grow to feel like they're more powerful, although I assume that could be the case in some in some areas. Um, but it's more the thought of the perceived power from others into that situation,
Okay.
and then the fear that people very often have in our society that um, that the person who has any form of a weapon on them is typically the more powerful individual.
True. Let's even imagine, for the sake of argument, that teachers are armed, say. How feasible do you think it is for a teacher to do your job and also be a class police officer or a school police officer?
So, I mean, that's definitely a very challenging topic to explore. As you were explaining that, one of the things that popped in my mind is that very frequently teachers have to act as a classroom police officer as it is now while they're not armed. And the reason that I say that is because we are essentially in our classrooms, we are the first line of enforcing safety for all of the students.
Okay.
Which I'm sure could very well turn into somebody shifting those words and saying, because you are that first line, you should be armed. However, as we start each school year, I believe personally that if we develop these positive rapports, it eliminates that need for us to be the police officer among the students, because those good, strong relationships are there, so that when concerns do come up, we're able to share a conversation and have the students come to us with concerns, which then eliminates a lot of that police officer type presence in the classroom. However, I do feel like if a teacher were armed, a lot of students, instead of developing that good positive rapport, would view the teacher in a very similar light as people view a police officer, which we, in our society, we have very different viewpoints on what a police officer is. There are some people who look at police officers and they celebrate that this police officer is in their presence. They're glad that that police officer is making the sacrifice to do that job.
Yes.
My father was a police officer and my mom was a teacher. And so I've seen where there's been some concerning views over police officers and the job that they perform. And I feel like there is a lot of the community that will celebrate the work that the police are doing.
Yes.
But there's no middle ground. You either celebrate it or you have a passionate dislike, to put it gently. And I feel like that view would then be created toward the teacher as well. And it depends on which perspective you have, whether you're passionate about the teacher having that weapon to protect, or whether you have this very strong dislike of that type of policy. That would then influence your view of that teacher as well, that would carry or not carry.
So going back to the Fox News report that we heard, the sheriff said that the students might not know which teacher was carrying. I mean, I don't know what kind of concealment he's talking about. I know a little bit about guns, not that much. I can imagine that at some point the students might notice a bulge somewhere. And students being curious might find out which teachers are armed and which are not. And that, I feel, may play into the scenario that you've just talked about. But I want you to explore a bit as we round off this conversation. As you know, this podcast is about friends at work, and it looks at emotional intelligence in the workplace. And as a teacher who works if you were a teacher who worked in an environment where your colleagues carried weapons, how do you imagine that scenario playing out?
I feel like that can, and I was just thinking about that question because it is definitely a very sensitive issue, and that's where a lot of my concerns with this do come in.
Okay.
There's obviously just going to be either those that do carry or those that do not carry is what it really ends up boiling down to if that kind of a policy should be passed.
Yeah.
However, I feel like there would be great tension between the teachers that did carry versus those that did not from a few different viewpoints. One of which would be a concern, but it could lead to certain confrontations because of the differing viewpoints and the values within those opinions.
Yes.
I mean, anything political, I think, can create a very big dividing line, which then can impact how friendly and how positive those work relationships are.
And
I feel like
what about in the influence on the general work environment?
Within the general work environment, I feel like it could create a lot of discomfort between colleagues because of those viewpoints that would be present. Those that did not carry might feel unsafe around those that did. And those that, I mean, I think you started to touch on a little bit in terms of the power struggle or the perceived power levels between those two colleagues. We all want to be able to go to a place of work where we feel comfortable.
Yeah.
We want to be able to go to a place of work where we feel safe, where we feel like we're an invested part, a valued part of the community of workers that we're in. But I think that there will be those teachers that are present in the workplace that would feel unsafe simply because there was a gun on some other teacher other than themselves. I worry that type of perception could even impact the teaching ability and the quality of teaching and learning that take place in those buildings. I feel like teachers teach best when they feel like they're in a valued, safe environment. As I'm sure that kind of applies to every profession, I think.
Yeah.
If you feel like you're valued in a safe environment, then most likely, I believe that you're going to be a very productive member in that workplace. As teachers, I feel like we have a very important job because we help students to learn how to learn.
Yes.
Which then contributes to how effective they're going to be in college or in whatever career choice they have down the line. And if we're not meeting the caliber of teaching and the caliber of learning that every student is truly entitled to, really, we're not doing our job. And anything, whether it's guns or any other variable that could impact that teaching and learning in the classroom, if it's impacting it in a negative way, or if it has a chance at impacting it in a negative way, or of holding students back from reaching their potential, of holding a teacher back from reaching his or her potential, it has no place in our schools.
That's our episode for this week. Thanks for listening. Let's continue the conversation. You can reach me by email at myfriendtoye@gmail.com or on Facebook at Friends at Work Podcast. And you can follow me on Twitter at Friends at Work US. Join me next time for another episode of Friends at Work podcast with Adetoye. Bye for now.